Good afternoon, everybody. This is Nevin the host of the Patriotic Populist, and with me is the recurring guest, Jeff Nyquist, who is an author and national security expert. Today, we're going to be talking about the COVID pandemic. We're going to be talking about the issue of vaccines and pharmaceuticals and how our supply chains are dependent on China, communist China in that respect. We're going to talk about how the policies regarding vaccination. We're going to be talking about Afghanistan. And then we're going to have a little nugget of a quote that I discovered uttered by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, on this show, we're populists and we're civic nationalists. So there's going to be some overlap with some of the surface views and positions of Miss Ocasio-Cortez or Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. But she uttered some rather interesting and disturbing, possibly sinister views on socialism and capitalism. And obviously on this show, we oppose socialism as properly defined, and we do support a version of capitalism. So we're going to be talking about that because the Democratic Party, elements of it are moving to the radical left. And Herschel, Jeff, and I have discussed this before. I've discussed it in my books. So I'd like to welcome Jeff to the program. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, always a pleasure, Jeff. So we're going to start off and we're going to talk about, a very controversial topic about vaccines, pharmaceuticals, PPEs, the role of China in really almost dominating since we gave permanent normal trade relations to the People's Republic of China. Um, American and foreign European pharmaceutical industries have outsourced their production to communist China. And it's gotten to the point where there's been quotes that I put in my latest book, which indicate that if China cut off our pharmaceutical supply, our pharmaceutical industry would collapse. And then Jeff has also gotten some interesting research on the composition of the vaccines, which also could potentially be weaponized by the Chinese. There are some hypotheses coming around regarding that. Correct me if I'm wrong. As well as the U.S. government's role in helping to allegedly buttress China's biological warfare. And lastly, we're going to also talk about COVID as being a biological warfare operation. So that'll be our whole discussion before we go on to Afghanistan and Miss Ocasio-Cortez. So what are your thoughts about, first, what the proper public policy should be regarding vaccination? Let's start off with that from the domestic level, if you don't mind revealing it.
Yeah. Obviously, I think that it's wrong to force people to take a medical treatment. The question of the medical treatment doesn't matter. It's your body. This has been a basic thing for liberals, especially saying that, look, they believe in the right of a woman to have an abortion, right? So because it's her body. Well, why doesn't that apply to people having the right to decide whether or not they're going to accept a vaccine? And we see there's another angle to this, and it's a political prudence angle. Do you want to split your country? Do you want unrest in your streets? Look what's happening in France. France wants to force the vaccine. They want to, on the whole population, want to marginalize with vaccine passports a large portion of their population, and even unvaccinated, even vaccinated people are standing up for the unvaccinated, both in Italy and France in protests. You've got in Italy people burning their cards, their passports, in solidarity with the unvaccinated. Um, and so I think wisdom in the policy of the government, I would really strongly advise the U.S. government and all levels of government and the governments in Western Europe, don't force this issue. This is very destructive and counterproductive for our societies because it's like just imagine, it's like making Jews wear the yellow star. You're marginalizing a part of your population that, in their own minds, this is their body. They have the right to decide, and you don't vaccinate people to protect other people. The vaccine's supposed to be the protective element. You know, if the vaccines work, then the people who are vaccinated are being protected. And if it's a choice, then it's their right to risk or make the decisions for themselves, for their own individual risk. And look, if the vaccines worked, we're approaching herd immunity. We ought to be. So this is really odd to me, that they would make such an unwise decision. And the bottom line with forcibly vaccinating the U.S. military is, with a significant section of the U.S. military not wanting the vaccinations, you're risking disrupting the U.S. military and demoralizing large sections of it. And I would really strongly advise against the U.S. government pursuing this angle. If you talk about a fiasco in Afghanistan, with the bungling way they pulled out, or are attempting to pull out, this fiasco with forcing the vaccine on the military could be the biggest, most catastrophic fiasco of them all.
Well, overall, I agree with you on this. I do not like the destructive implications of a vaccine passport. I think it is going too far. I think it could shake our political system and our already fragile social fabric even more. It's going to fray it even more. When I think of vaccine passports, I think of Jeff Nyquist, Harder Nyquist, Comrade Nyquist, show me your papers.
Yeah.
That
Well,
rubs me
it would
the
be
that
difficult
kind of
to.
rubs me the wrong way. And I know people personally. Many are vaccinated. I also know people near and dear to me who are unvaccinated by choice, who use similar arguments that you just propounded right now. And I have to respect that, because there are people that have incredibly strong immunities that in one case, one individual who is very close to me had COVID twice and has a natural immunity. I also know other people who could not get the vaccine because they are have autoimmune diseases, and they've taken measures to protect themselves. And thank God, knock on wood, have not gotten COVID yet, or have gotten COVID in one case who has autoimmune disease, but thank God has really battled it off and has a better immune count, antibody count to the COVID virus. So I think the science is not fully conclusive regarding this. I think the best bet is to use the bully pulpit to encourage people to take protective measures, to use prudence. And the other thing I would like to see is also, we really need to go towards autarky, or largely autarky, an autarkic form of capitalism when it comes to pharmaceutical, PPE, antibiotic, and vaccine production. I mean, it is incredibly reckless, absolutely reckless, criminal that we are dependent on communist China for those kinds of products that are critical to the survival of our population. So that we should be focusing on that as a country. I know good people like Cliff Kincaid who are pro-vaccine, people in my family, and then I know anti-vaccine people. I don't even like to say anti-vaccine people. Let's call them vaccine skeptics, because the legitimate elements of the anti-vaccine movement that I know are people that question the science on a scientific basis. Because guess what? Who is benefiting? As you would say, Jeff, cui bono, the Latin phrase, who benefits from this? And who's egging this on? Russia and China. This is their state media, which is historically and currently used to stoke disinformation and disunity. Cliff Kincaid, formerly of Accuracy Media, now of America Survival, has written some excellent reports. And Trevor Loudon, who's a vaccine skeptic, he even said that despite his skepticism of the vaccines, he is deeply concerned about the disunity. So while, in my opinion, we're wasting time about, at each other's throats about, oh, we're going to ostracize you because you're not on the vaccine, or you're on the vaccine and you're a government cheap or whatever. Here, China and Russia is laughing all the way to the bank at our demise as a country. That's
Well,
what.
you look at France and the protests in the street. This is a very disruptive thing to divide a country, and I think to the credit of many people in France and Italy, a lot of the people who are vaccinated are marching with the unvaccinated, supporting their right of choice, and I think this is an issue of rights that we have to resolve. You can't marginalize or make into second-class citizen such a large population, and you shouldn't do it to anybody. You shouldn't be marginalizing people on the basis of them refusing a medical treatment. That's just so incredibly dangerous, and you wonder where this is coming from. We do know that we have a totalitarian element, not only on the right but on the left as well, that really has a large hold on a lot of these governments in the Western countries, and they're becoming more and more prevalent. And any excuse to take control over people's lives is taken. You know, a lot of this legislation going forward now on the basis of belief in global warming science, and of course, science in quotation marks. Um, they're going to try to crush certain industries and destroy our energy independence and so on, without allowing the rest of us to say, "Hey, wait a minute." Uh, this is dragging the whole country down a kind of path to economic ruin for the country, and certainly in the case of China, making our industries and making our economy permanently subservient to China. And getting back to the question of medicines and vaccines, look, China, I understand, makes 80% of the ingredients in our vitamins and our supplements. This is China's an enemy nation. This is not wise, because what if they wanted to poison millions of Americans? So involvement of China in vaccine precursors, and they are involved in them, and involvement in China in the making of medicines. Look, we all have loved ones that are on a high blood pressure medication. If we ended up in a military uh, confrontation with China, could they cut those medicines off, putting at risk millions of Americans who are dependent on high blood pressure medications from China? Would that then result in a lot of people having strokes and heart attacks because they're dependent on those medications? We should never be dependent on a potential enemy, and I believe China is an enemy, just de facto, because of their communism and because of all the countries they're working with, like Iran and various terrorist organizations around the globe, and the very strident anti-Americanism that peeks out from time to time in the statements of their press. We should not have such intimate relationships with these folks. So, I mean, doesn't that make sense?
Of course, our position on the show is that China and communism in general is an enemy of the United States. There's no question about it. In my opinion and in Herschel's opinion, my co-host, Trump didn't even go far enough when it came to policy with China. I think eventually we need to embark on a plan on a bipartisan basis to wean ourselves off of trade with communist China and Putin's Russia and any other enemy country. And there are quite a few enemy countries, so of course it makes sense. Our policy towards China and Russia has been national suicide, essentially. As it comes to the domestic policy, I am not in favor of vaccine passports because it will shake this country at its political foundations. It will further exacerbate internal tensions in this country. And to be perfectly honest with you and the audience, I took the vaccine. I got COVID. It doesn't prevent COVID. Of course, is your argument, the breakthrough infections, it's much more milder. But I could also give it to somebody who's unvaccinated, and I want to protect those people. I don't want to get them sick. And people who had the vaccines can still transmit it. So we have to protect ourselves and use as much prudence as we can, because there are people also at the same token who have had COVID and they had, as I said, natural immunity. So really the jury is not out on the science. I think we just have to be prudent as a society. And I think we have to be united as a nation. And vaccine passports are not the way to go. I think there
Yeah,
needs to be a lot more when it comes to education and transparency, and using as much preventative measures as you can, and sensible measures as you can regarding this.
yeah, and I would propose, my thing about China being involved in supplements and medicines and vaccine precursors, an epistemology for national strategy, and that is err on the side of caution, never underestimate your enemy, and assume the worst. And I think that the Pentagon and the intelligence community needs to be looking at all of these products, supplements, vitamins, vaccine precursors, to make sure what is going in, what are the Chinese doing with this? And they need to really be defending us, because this is a potential in an age of chemical and biological warfare, very advanced nanotechnology. What we put in our bodies that comes from China could be adulterated, and there could be implications for a mass casualty attack. And I hate to panic people. I don't want anybody to panic, but this has been very unwise of the United States to allow this. I mean, first of all, allowing China in our capital markets is also a very unwise thing. We need to detach ourselves economically from dependence on China, because China is an enemy. And if people say not an enemy, a potential enemy, we'll see, err on the side of prudence, assume the worst. Um, so I really don't understand the course that we've taken. I understand that a lot of uh, capitalists and big money people say, well, they make everything so cheap, we have to work with them. No, we don't. There's workarounds, and we have to really examine this. And I think people on the left and the right can agree now, especially since they've seen China's behavior since the outbreak of COVID. It is not a very edifying thing to watch the Chinese right now.
Well, I'll
They've
give you
done
an
a lot of,
example.
yeah, bad things to
Give you
us.
an example. During the height of the pandemic, you had Josh Hawley on the right, a Republican senator from Missouri, and then also Bernie Sanders, who's been very good on a number of trade policy issues, amongst other things. And there are other things where I virulently disagree with him. But he has called, Sanders and Hawley have again called for the United States to decouple its pharmaceutical, PPE, antibiotic, and vaccine production from China. So there are forces on the left and the right, and the whole purpose of this show, in part, is to unite patriotic elements of the left and the right together who put country above commercialism and above sectarianism, and that's one of the goals of this show. um, it's just an absolutely dangerous situation that we've put ourselves in, our economic elites and our political elites, who work often at the behest of our economic elites. And what's even more sinister, and I'd like you to comment further, Jeff, I believe that this pandemic of COVID was a biological attack. Let's go through some of the evidence, Jeff, on that. What do you have for us that has convinced you that COVID could be a possible biological attack against the free world?
Well, we have the secret speech of Chiao Chen, made about 18, 19 years ago, in which the defense minister, Chiao Chen, told an elite group of party cadre that the strategy was to attack the United States, launch a biological attack against the United States in the future to kill 100 to 200 million Americans. There's some controversy about this speech, whether it is real. The Epoch Times got hold of it and translated it, published it in 2005 on Epoch Times. On close study of the speech, I find things in the speech that a defector, Stanislav Lunev, told me in private, things that had not been published before. How could, if this was some kind of fake document, that this speech didn't take place, how come they knew secret material that Stanislav Lunev defected with? How could they have known this? Lunev was a sinologist. He spoke fluent Mandarin. He worked in China at one time. So this really alarmed me. At first, when I first saw the speech at the first reading, I thought, oh, this can't be true. It's too far out. But when I started to examine it, I found point after point that was very much in alignment with defector testimony and other things I'd seen. And that really began to alarm me. That's the first reason to really be worried about a pandemic coming out of China. The other thing is the United States, since 1969, when Nixon destroyed our offensive lethal biological weapons, and our policy was if we get attacked with a biological weapon, we retaliate with nuclear weapons. So in any kind of pandemic attack, China would have to have infected its own population as part of it, as an alibi, and claim that it got out of a lab accidentally, which is what they're now claiming. And they can, they have control of information there. They can manufacture the evidence of an accidental release. They could have run the whole scenario. First, they tell us it comes from which is was a total lie, that it came from, a wet market, in China where animals were being sold that were infected. Well, first of all, they don't eat bats in China, right? That wasn't, they weren't selling bats to eat there. And the other thing is the timing of this. The timing was the timing of the infection in Wuhan matched perfect with the Chinese New Year, which is the biggest time of people going out from China. People come, Chinese diaspora from all over the world, from Europe, Australia, the United States. They go to Wuhan for the celebration. Wuhan is sort of the hub of China, communications hub. It's sort of in the center along these rivers of communication where they use for communications, and rail centers and airports. And so Wuhan is extremely important in that regard. So you brew it in Wuhan, and then these people, they go out when the new year ends. They had a potluck. They had, I guess, some kind of a dance. They had all kinds of celebrations where people were brought together in large numbers so they could infect each other. And then on airplanes, they go out, and then as soon as they went out to the rest of the world, they shut down Wuhan to the rest of China. Now, this indicates they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what was going on. They, in fact, when the virus was spreading within Wuhan, they suppressed anyone. They threatened doctors or anyone who would talk about that there's a pandemic. And when the city of Wuhan wanted to stop, for example, the potluck Beijing ordered them, go ahead with the potluck. So this is premeditation. They knew exactly what this virus was. It appears that they wanted it to go to the rest of the world to create this pandemic, and they brewed it in a timely fashion to get out on New Year's. I don't know how you get around these, shall we call them coincidences? But then again, when you're dealing with strategy, there are no coincidences. And I return to my epistemology for national strategy: err on the side of caution, assume the worst, and never underestimate your enemy. So my epistemology dictates that we must regard this in principle as an attack until it's proven otherwise.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and there's additional information too that I'd like to share with the audience. First of all, Jeff wrote a very long paper regarding this on his website, J.R. Nyquist blog. I think it was from 2020, the early to middle part of 2020. So I encourage people to search for it, to look on Mr. Nyquist or Jeff's blog, because there's a lot of valuable information regarding the COVID pandemic in that essay, where he really connects the dots. But let's talk about some additional evidence. Let's talk about a defecting Chinese virologist. I forget her name off the top of my head. And she was kind of in the news in conservative quarters, but for the most part, her voice was really ignored. She was basically dismissed. And she alleged that the COVID pandemic was a biological weapon, and that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was PLA, People's Liberation Army controlled facility. You have a communist Chinese professor, rather high-level individual, high-profile individual, and this is reported again in the mainstream press, where he said that, amongst other things, the United States was defeated on the biological front, the economic front, the trade front, etc. That was an admission that was made. Then you also,
by the way, that defective virologist is Dr. Zhang Jing Wei.
yes, That's her name. It was,
Right.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And she has her own Twitter page. I encourage you to follow her. She also is, really beating the drum on the China connection, communist connection to COVID, as well as also some of the vaccine related science. So I encourage you to follow her on Twitter. And let's take a look also at my last point, where ever since the Clinton administration, successive defense departments in different administrations, Republican and Democratic, have pointed since the 1990s that China has been building up a biological weapons program. In fact, the Chinese Communist dictatorship has recently announced that they are launching a multi-year plan to develop biological weapons. This was after Xi Jinping became General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. So we have a lot of circumstantial evidence as well as gun evidence, some smoking gun evidence to really show that this pandemic was released. And might I add, the individuals who were questioning the origin of COVID-19, who are saying it could have been accidentally leaked from a government biological lab with possible military connections. Now that's being accepted as conventional wisdom, but during 2020, it was dismissed as kookery. Remember when accidental? And I have corresponded with two military officers through Facebook. One who's a retired general in the Army, I won't mention names, and another one who has worked also with the different issues related to trade policy, and another who I think was a lieutenant colonel at one time. Both have given related their expertise to me that it was either accidentally or purposely released as a biological weapon, but it clearly was a biological weapon. So
Yeah.
this is an act of war. We have to, unfortunately, we have to think or believe or act. We should act like almost we're in a state of war with China and Russia. I'm not saying going attacking these countries, but we have to embark on a strategy that these governments are not our friends, and we have to act accordingly. And we have to be almost on a quasi-war footing without obviously being militaristic like Russia or China, but we have to act like the Cold War has never ended. It's just assumed a new form on a new level.
Yeah. Look, it's again, it's a erring on the side of caution. I think the other element is that the people that are really pushing the vaccine in the West are people to the center left and the left. Um, and people that we know. I mean, you look at Trevor Loudon's work, the vaccines are really being pushed by those people that Trevor Loudon has listed as having communist connections. And so if the communist influencers and active measures, the people that push forward the active measures in the press, by the way, and other, and the censorship that Google and maybe YouTube will censor this, are pushing for this vaccination in a way that they're disallowing free speech and argumentation about it. In fact, we're not discussing any facts that I don't think anything we've said is counterfactual. We're not discussing science. Um, but they want to stop discussion here. And that is sort of a indication of a totalitarian process or mentality pushing something. So we have to be very wary when something stops being about health and is beginning to be about totalitarian control of society, because there we're crossing a line, a very dangerous line, as it happens. That must not be crossed if we want to remain a free society. And this is really being called into question whether or not we are a free society anymore when we get to the fact that certain voices now can't be heard, and they're stomped and they're squashed and they're threatened. A huge part of the population is about to be marginalized. Heaven forfend. But people are getting afraid, and I think their fears are justified.
Well, yeah, and I think the political fears, it's not misplaced. I know people, I'm close to one particular person who uh, is originally from a communist country who uses the same line of argumentation that you've been saying, and to a degree I've been saying too, about the political implications of this. And is the need to maintain public health going to be misused by individuals is really an honest and very pressing and important question here. As our friend Jimmy from Brooklyn has mentioned before, one of his quotes is, "The issue is never the issue is revolution." And a little background about Jimmy from Brooklyn, who Jeff and I have spoken to personally over the phone. He has infiltrated numerous Communist Party meetings, leadership councils, whatnot. He's done that for decades. So he knows what he's talking about when it comes to the strategy of domestic communist subversives. And this leads me into this question. We do have elements within the elected bodies who have these sort of authoritarian, potentially authoritarian um, impulses. And, that is, of course, a major concern of ours on this show. Let's take Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example. And she is an up-and-coming star and has been in the Democratic Party. And I recently came across a quote that was a little disturbing, to be honest with you. And it bears in mind that we should talk about this. And she said, in response to a question about so-called democratic socialism, whatever that means, ultimately calling for an end to capitalism, during a fire-line interview on PBS, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez answered, quote, "Ultimately, we are marching towards progress on this issue. I do think that we are going to see an evolution in our economic system at an unprecedented degree, and it's hard to say what direction that it takes." Well, to me, when I look at that, that's a very vague answer. It's not an honest answer. You have others on the left and right who will give an answer. Bernie Sanders will say, "Look, I don't want to abolish capitalism. I just want, these various social democratic policies and this and that, and everything else." When somebody is vague like that, do you really want to trust them governing the country, because you don't know really what they truly believe? Do you want them making public policy regarding necessarily public health or vaccine passports and other things that are very, very critical decisions affecting our nation? I mean, when I read that quote to you, I could read it again, Jeff. I mean, what's your impression? Don't you think it's very untrustworthy? She's not really saying much of anything. It's just
Well,
ideological gobbledygook.
no, she's saying quite clearly that she wants to eradicate capitalism. I mean, and she's just saying, well, we don't know how that's going to go. I mean, when you say you want to get rid of capitalism, I take you at your word. And the thing is, capitalism is a word that the Marxists like to use because it's sort of, in a way, their invention. It is the idea of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, that the people who have money, have an absolute plutocracy, dictatorship over the society. I think in reality, we have a pluralistic society, and business itself is divided. There's a lot of different industries and businesses, and their interests don't always coincide. And as you know, my political philosophy is that of the founding fathers, is separation of powers, checks and balances. And the problem with Marxism or anti-capitalism is that it inevitably produces a unitary power that has no checks or balances on it. And the problem with creating a unitary power without checks and balances is that it eliminates all freedom, all dissent, and you have the crushing police state with a human with a boot stomping on a human face forever. And this is what we want to avoid. We don't want to be stuck in a status of Cuba or Red China or even Putin's Russia, because these are not free countries. The people are treated very badly by the government. They do not have freedom of speech. They do not have, if you're a business owner, you can have your property taken from you at any time. Rights are not secure in these countries. And so why would you work hard or try to achieve something Or why would you even dare to tell the truth, to contribute in that way, which I believe is very valuable? If people can't tell the truth, you have a society that's increasingly deranged, being governed by lies. It's very pathological. So, my belief is in checks and balances. And someone like Ocasio-Cortez is dangerous because she doesn't believe in checks and balances. She is really advocating an absolutism on the basis of some kind of socialistic ideology, statism. And, she is the very fact that she would take an oath of an oath of office as a member of Congress, swearing an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. She's lying. She is in violation of her oath by the very words that come out of her mouth as a congressman, right? So, we have to have a system that actually enforces loyalty to it, and that when people are actually outright traitors, they have to be held to account. And for her to advocate the end of the capitalist system, oh, that's not ambiguous. She's not being ambiguous at all. The only thing she's ambiguous about is how she's going to do it. She and
Well, I would
her
like to know. I
friends.
think she
Yeah.
owes it to her constituents and the American public on how she does that. On this show, Jeff, I outline it in my books. You know this, the rest of my audience knows this. I outline the policies I'd like to see triumph and in this country. I'm very open about that. When a political leader, political office holder, political personality is not honest on what form their political system is going to take, something that is a radical departure from what most Americans want, even on the moderate left, I think she owes it to people to really say, this is what I want to do, and that's it. And
Yeah.
I really take offense that she's vague like that. But
Well,
that's
but Nevin, is there any system where you eradicate capitalism and you maintain freedom and rights?
That's
Is
a
there
really
any
hard
way to do
question.
that?
Jeff, can you give me about 5 seconds to give you an answer?
Yeah.
No. The answer is no. And she also said later at a conference, to me, capitalism is irredeemable. Now, let's talk about capitalism. I mean, you and I are critics of capitalism in varying forms, or let's say uncontrolled, unchecked, globalized
Well,
corporate capital.
well, look, we don't have a utopia here. There
No,
is
of
no
course not.
such
It's
thing in
never.
this world as a utopia. So the capitalism so-called, if we, and of course it's a Marxist term, so we're using Marxist terminology just to use the term, but what they refer to as capitalism is this dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Look, I don't accept their definition of what capitalism is. I had this argument with a socialist on Twitter recently. He said, "Oh, you're mystifying. You're not talking about capitalism correctly." When I had mentioned that capitalism existed in the ancient world, and he says that's not true. And I said that's because you only accept a Marxist idea of capitalism. Read Max Weber. Max Weber wrote extensively about capitalism in the ancient world and the role that capitalism played. Um, these people, they're stuck in these strict Marxist categories of thought. No, we have to be open-minded and really scientific, because Marxism isn't really scientific, it just claims to be. And we have to understand that what I understand as capitalism is a market system. It's the freedom to buy and sell. That's what I understand by it. It's a much broader definition than Marx's definition. And so if you don't have the most basic freedom to buy and sell and own property, none of your other freedoms matter, because
That
without
goes
that
without
freedom,
saying.
you're basically a slave of the state.
Well, that goes without saying. And, that's why I was being kind of sarcastic. In response to you is, give me 5 seconds to answer the question. It's obvious. This show supports, as a starting point, the system of private property and private enterprise. There are so many reasons why I support it. Look, part of the American DNA and the DNA even in the West, but particularly in the United States, is you have a lot of people out there that want to become business owners. They have ideas, and I'm talking about independent businesses, by the way, that are pillars of the community, small, medium, and even large independent businesses. And they want to pursue their dream. They want to sell a product. They want to advance their country's welfare. their community's welfare, create a job market, all the rest of it. That's natural. To overthrow that part of the American DNA, think about the casualties involved. Think about how a country's spirit would be broken, like the United States, when that's programmed into our DNA. Two, out of all the economic systems out there, and all of them are not perfect, because there's no such thing as a perfect political system. We always want to achieve better and strive for self-improvement, just like someone's health and exercising. You always want to achieve better. But the fact of the matter is that the system of what we feel on this show, a system of nationalist and balanced forms of capitalism that used to exist in this country, is the best system there is. And it produces accountability. I'll give you an example. When I needed to get a sleep study done because I had a snoring issue, I went to one, what do they call it, pulmonologist, I believe. Good doctor. The office was horrible in service. Horrible. And I had a horrible experience. So what did I do, Jeff? Did my research, looked for other healthcare providers, all private, and I found another one who was great. Fought on behalf of me for the insurance companies to get the proper equipment. Boom. Capitalism, or even my version of the version of capitalism that Herschel and I support on this show, breeds accountability. Two, when you look at command socialist economies, whether the Third Reich, the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, there's incredible amounts of corruption and slavery involved in there.
Massive corruption. And all these socialist systems immediately devolve into massive corruption. There's no doubt. Because then you have government officials who, through taking bribes, can dish out favors or punishments. And it's extremely damaging to society.
And the working classes of those countries do not see the fruit of their labor either. I mean,
That's right.
I know somebody, well, I know multiple people from communist countries. My girlfriend is from a communist country originally. I mean, interview her on this show. I don't know if she'd come on. Well, she is kind of vocal, actually, but, just this is what they say. This is the science. This is what the people from socialistic dictatorships or fascistic dictatorships are saying. So we have to be honest when we're crafting public policy. What are the realities on the ground? What is the nature of your society, the political system? Now, when it comes to checks and balances, yeah, I mean, there are times and many occasions where we do need a unitary, nationalist, strong government, central government, but then there are other times where there needs to be built-in measures of accountability to prevent too much overreach, just like you can't have a weak central government to deal with national security issues, national economic crises, and things like that. But you also, as I said, you don't want a government that is too authoritarian either on the other extreme, because again, you have no accountability. So you have to have that delicate balance, and I'm fine with that evolving with the times, but you can never lose sight of the fact that you still have to have a balance. If you will, because otherwise, if it's too weak, you invite the danger of collapse, like the Articles of Confederation, for example. But then if it's, over-centralized where you have no representation whatsoever, and you just have rule by decree, well, I mean, take your pick in history where that leads to.
Yeah, no, it's a very serious problem. This problem of this totalitarian element of thought, and whatever this is the difference between the Marxist-controlled and manipulated left and the more reasonable left. This is the difference, of course, between the Nazi right or the National Socialist right and the reasonable conservatism. And the fact of the matter is the Marxists have total contempt for liberals, and the National Socialists have total real contempt for conservatives. and to understand the extreme right and the extreme left, and to understand the people that you could make uh, a, uh, a reasonable commonwealth out of, a reasonable free society out of. We have to be very clear on this, especially when we're dealing with these complicated, health measures during a pandemic, and future biological attacks. And there is this other issue I just want to touch on, the incompetence factor. We have seen such incredible incompetence from our government. The Afghan thing is just the most recent illustration of it. Are we going to trust a government that has not been held accountable? I mean, look, 9/11, nobody lost their job. We've had countless things happen in this country, and there's no prosecutions, there's no investigations. Hillary Clinton's email scandal is a good example. There is no accountability by anyone, really. And what prosecutions, political prosecutions, take place seem to be political and not having to do with anything that was really done wrong. So we need to straighten it up here. We need to police our own side and have a valid process. We need to clean it up, as Trump said, clean the swamp. And we need to have a kind of common white agreement that we don't want corruption. We don't want totalitarian measures. And we can give kudos to those people on the left that have stood up and said, hey, this is going the wrong way. This is too extreme. And there are those voices. Bill Maher, for example, on the left has said, wait a minute, this is too extreme. This is, these are the kind of voices that we need to have a kind of unity with, so that we don't fall off the edge into the abyss of totalitarianism, because it can happen very easily to a society when they use fear, like in this pandemic, to drive people into embracing these kind of policies. And this, we just have to combat it.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, when you look at the literature of different communist groups, this may shock the audience, may even shock you, Jeff. But based on many aspects of Bernie Sanders' voting record and his utterances in support of a form of welfare capitalism, really since 1990, he has earned the ire of the left. The Workers' World Party, for example, absolutely hates him. The Party of Socialism and Liberation hates him. Communist Party USA claims he's not one of them, but he is useful in the critique of the current neoliberal capitalism. You look at Elizabeth Warren, they criticize her for voting for Trump's defense budget, for example, or her support, as she said, for full-throated capitalism. So the CPUSA said, well, she's the erstwhile progressive leader, making a snide comment. And, this is instructive because the left in Russia was very divided against the Bolsheviks too. While the Bolsheviks had no problem taking members of the Okhrana and the so-called Black Hundreds, who were very critical of capitalism, by the way, the Black Hundreds, known as the Union of Russian People, they were massacring leftists, social revolutionaries, anarchists, Mensheviks. There were massive labor strikes in the early Bolshevik Russia that was brutally put down. It was a left-wing Jew, Fanya Kaplan, a social revolutionary, who tried to assassinate Lenin.
Yeah, she shot him in the neck. Yeah.
That's correct. So one of the things I would predict in a Red Dawn scenario in the United States is very sharp divisions on the left. You have Caleb Maupin, who is a hardline Stalinist, a rising star of the left, it seems, and works for Russia Today, an Iranian's press TV, real anti-American sort of person. I'm on his Facebook page, to monitor him, and every other second he's lambasting the so-called bread tube left, like Vaush and other commentators who are more sort of social democrats, worker cooperative type of left, rather than Stalinist command and control dictatorship types. So there's real divisions on the left. And what concerns me is you get somebody like AOC, for example, who plans on possibly primarying Chuck Schumer. Do you want somebody that down the line to potentially like that, but becoming more prominent voice in public policy when she has quotes like that, when she's clearly hiding what she truly wants to do. Yeah, she's against capitalism, but what does she want to do? Does she owes it to people to say to say you want to collectivize land or nationalize everything that's not nailed down. And when you hide something like that, and communist leaders like Fidel Castro and Ho Chi Minh have done that purposely, that's where I get worried. So,
Yeah. Well, I think I would say about Cortez what Nietzsche said about Wagner. Cortez isn't really a politician; she's an actress, and that she's following a script. And I don't. What I'm afraid of is the people behind her who are writing that script, and that troubles me. Um, and so you've got the work of Trevor Loudon, and I would recommend everyone to look at Trevor Loudon. He is really investigating these people with Marxist and even Stalinist connections, because it's a real movement, and they are threatening us, and they're connected, I believe, to Russia and China, and that the Cold War didn't end. That Russia, China, Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, all these countries, whatever divisions they pretended to have, if you talk to defectors from that world and defectors post-Soviet collapse, they will tell you in private of a degree of cooperation and coordination between these countries that is frightening. And we have not had a full discussion of this because there's so many interests, people who want to do business in these countries, and they would really lose out on their business if we understood there is a communist bloc and it has not gone away, and they're coming for us now with their fifth column operating here in North America and in Western Europe.
absolutely. Before we go on to Afghanistan, one thing I'd like to add, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, was involved heavily as an activist, at least activist in DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. Well, when you look at the World Socialist website, one of the myriad of left-wing publications, lo and behold, it talks about how DSA has adopted Stalinist positions, praising Stalin, even for the assassination of Leon Trotsky and other rivals who were just as totalitarian as Stalin. So
That is really crazy when somebody is supporting Stalin's assassination of Trotsky in Mexico in 1940 now, which is really it's a crime. Having another political rival assassinated, for somebody to be cheering that on now, ooh, that's a big red flag. Those people
no
are
pun
not only
intended.
nuts, but they're dangerous nuts, and
Yeah,
that's the
no pun
problem.
intended.
Yeah, no, I mean exactly. You see, the thing is that we have to be discerning now, and we have to really discern those peoples are enemies of America, of freedom, of everything that we are as a country. They want to transform the country into a Soviet type dictatorship. I mean, and the problem is that we've never in this country been in a position where people could just outright state that and not draw the attention of the FBI and our security services. But now it seems like the FBI and security services are more interested in investigating people like me, that we're somehow dangerous because we want to defend the principles of the country, of the founders, of the Constitution, and those people are not a danger. This really worries me. Who's gotten into the management of the Pentagon? You see General Mark Milley in his testimony before Congress saying that, the January 6th event was basically due to white rage, and that it was a racist uprising against the Constitution. No, that's not exactly truthful or right. And that scares me that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs has a viewpoint that I could read off of any Marxist publication. You could go to Marxist World Review or whatever publication you want, and you can read the same thing, and it's coming out of Mark Milley's mouth. This is really frightening to me.
That's disappointing, especially from General Milley, because General Milley, for years, has sounded the alarm on the Sino-Russian axis and its military power, warning that America could face defeat. And I think a lot of these individuals and the elites also do it in part to maintain their careers, which is incredibly sad.
Yeah,
And
they
I
do.
think that's the case with Milley too, as well, because Milley really should know better, with all due respect to him, of course. So that was deeply disturbing because he has sounded the alarm on the foreign threats and how we would have our butts handed in our military exercises against them, in these simulated
Well,
military.
that's the problem is that we get a lot of lip service to the right things, and then we get lip service to the wrong things from the same people. It's like, okay, well, which is it? Do you understand what a fifth column is? Do you understand how penetrated the U.S. government is, and you're going along with it? So how secure are we? And then when you look at the problem in Afghanistan, so this is a good segue into Afghanistan.
Mhm.
The, you know, what did Milley do, and what did the other generals do? And why have you got Marines and Army people defending the airstrip there outside Kabul when those two service branches don't always cooperate oh so good in a tactical situation? And how did you allow the country to collapse so rapidly? I mean, wasn't the plan going to be we leave and they have a chance to survive after we go? Not collapse in 9 days or whatever it was that it took the country to collapse. And now there's 33,000 to 100,000 of our allies, Afghan allies, stuck there. Maybe 4,000 Christian Afghans that could be slaughtered. And we got 10 to 15,000 Americans trapped. And how do we get them out exactly? And the Taliban is all around our people with guns. And there's like a standoff there. I mean, defending an airfield with a couple buildings that's absolutely flat. I mean, for if you're an infantryman and you've got only a few armored cars or whatever to protect you, you're a sitting duck surrounded by that much firepower from the Taliban. Um, there could be a bloodbath here if this goes wrong. And I know they have some kind of ceasefire agreement and they're trying to negotiate it outward to get people out. But the Taliban is taking down modems and taking down communications in preparation for a massacre that they don't want to be caught doing in front of cameras that are connected to the rest of the world. I mean, that's the only way to read it.
Yeah.
And this massacre is something that our leaders are ultimately going to be responsible for because when you take responsibility for an ally and for a country, that's responsibility. You own it. And the incompetence here, Mr. Biden, General Milley, and the other generals that engineered this, I'm sorry. We need accountability here on you. We really need it because we can't have this anymore because what's it going to be next? Are we going to have a fiasco in Europe and Ukraine with Taiwan, with India, with Japan? Where is the next strike going to be where one of our allies goes down for the count and all we can do is, well, we can't fight, we got to run and we don't have the capability. This is an administration that wants to get rid of our land-based missile forces. Well, the Chinese are rapidly building a land-based nuclear ICBM force right now. This is an administration of insane ideas. Insane meaning that if you follow those ideas, you destroy yourself. But they can't seriously want to destroy themselves or kill themselves, do they? I mean, that is the definition of madness, that you are doing everything possible to destroy your own country. Unless, of course, it's not madness, it's treason. It's one or the other. We need to get clarity on that.
Well, I would err on the side of the latter as opposed to the former. That's how it's shaping up. Um, yeah, I mean, already the Taliban, according to reports that I've been reading, different news articles from the right as well as more center and even center left, all perspectives. Taliban is already arresting people left and right. They're already looting the country in certain ways. They executed the chief of the national Afghan National Police Force. Um, they already are launching a carefully orchestrated selective reign of terror. They also are continuing their relations with the People's Republic of China. In fact, despite the suppression of the George W. Bush administration, Rowan Scarborough and Bill Gertz wrote an article in their column Inside the Ring back in the early 2000s where they revealed that Al Qaeda and Taliban received military support, including personnel from Red China and a common anti-American front. We talk about how the Taliban has been supported by the Russians, and I know there's controversy about the story about the bounties that the Russians have paid for the assistance and bounties that have been paid to the Taliban by the Russians. But I do believe they exist because that fits in the overall pattern of Russian strategy of forging a common united front. In fact, the Russians and the Chinese, Hamas, the Palestine Islamic Jihad, Iran, they have all fell over themselves to welcome the Taliban victory as a liberation and them wanting to increase their relationships with the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, as it's now once again being called. So there's a major strategic issue right here at play. I mean, what is your opinion? I know it's a very difficult and sensitive question. Do you think we should have gone into Afghanistan in 2001? And whether or not, how should we have disengaged from Afghanistan, or should we have disengaged from Afghanistan?
We went in there to punish the Taliban, and we brought the Northern Alliance into command. We put Mohammad Karzai in there, but Mohammed Fahim, the defense minister, Karzai was complaining. Of course, Fahim died in 2017, but Karzai was always complaining that Fahim was a Russian agent and that the Russians were really in control, and that we fought that war to facilitate, Russian heroin, the Russian mafia's heroin trade in the country, the growing of the poppies. There's a lot of unclear elements, but what I would say is that the Taliban has been infiltrated by Al Qaeda. And Al Qaeda, I believe, is a Russian-controlled operation now. I think the Russians heavily influenced. Ayman al-Zawahiri, after bin Laden's death, became the head of Al Qaeda. Ayman al-Zawahiri was a longtime KGB operative, and the late Alexander Litvinenko spoke about this, wrote about this, tried to warn the British and American intelligence services about this. And the fact that it's Russia and China, I think, are both coming into power through the Taliban. And they're going to have some kind of agreement for dividing up the resources. The Russians continue with their opium trade, and the Chinese get the lithium, the rare earth metals, and the other elements. I understand there's like $1 trillion worth of valuable minerals and so forth under the ground in Afghanistan. So they're going to get it. But as far as as a strategic move, taking out bin Laden and punishing the Taliban, it was always impossible that we should control Afghanistan. I know people make the argument, oh, we can control Afghanistan. We've got the equipment and means. Look at a map. Afghanistan is a landlocked Asian country surrounded by our enemies, right? Because I count Pakistan as an enemy. China and the former Soviet Central Asia, which is basically controlled by Moscow. Iran, definitely an enemy. Pakistan allied with China much more than ever aligned with us. So here you have Afghanistan surrounded by countries whose policies are essentially inimical to our own. And we're going to control it? An island of land in the middle of Asia surrounded by our enemies, and we're going to control it? Tell me how we're going to control it. If we put a giant army in there at the beginning of any major conflict, it would be trapped. We would have no way to supply it. We'd have no way to get it out. Right now, we're only getting out of there because, some of these neighboring countries are allowing us to get in and out. But if they wanted to prevent us from getting in and out, they could just completely trap everybody there. And so, look, it's unwise. Don't encircle yourself. Don't advance into a position where you're encircling yourself. I mean, encirclement is the condition in military affairs. It's the position you do not want to hold, is a position where you're walking into an encirclement. Because encirclement, that's the ideal position from which to attack somebody. Oh, they're encircled. We can wipe them out. We can trap them. We can cut them out. Look at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu with the French in the Vietnam conflict in Southeast Asia. Look at the encirclement of the French armies in 1940. I keep using the French as an example, but look, every time there's a major military defeat, it's due to an encirclement. The destruction of the German Army Group Center in the summer of '44, encirclement through pincer, through double envelopment. You're walking into Afghanistan, it's already enveloped. It's a strategic mistake. So this is the thing, the stupidity of our choices And it's like there are a bunch of strategic illiterates running U.S. policy. You really think you can do everything? Well, first of all, they never admitted that China and Russia are enemies, that Pakistan is an enemy. They've admitted that Iran is. You got to wake up. You got to know who your friends and enemies are. It's the most fundamental rule of politics and strategy. Know who your friends are and know who your enemies are. And so we should never have made promises to the people in Afghanistan that we were going to support them, because ultimately we're not able to keep such a promise.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I think at bare minimum, we should have punished the Taliban through selective bombing and sabotage campaigns in the wake of 9/11, sanctions, which of course were already levied. Also sanctions against Pakistan, which was only one of three countries that recognized the Taliban when it took over in 1996. And in fact, Pakistan is another country that welcomed the Taliban victory, the recent Taliban victory this month, might I add. So we have to take a look at that. And by the way, according to an Al Qaeda defector who supposedly reported in the Associated Press in the year 2000, well, apparently in an Al Qaeda training camp in Taliban occupied Afghanistan, this defector revealed that there were Cuban, North Korean, Saddam Hussein's Iraqis, and the Iranians, amongst others, in these training camps. So there definitely is a communist connection with the Taliban and even with Al Qaeda, adding to the information that you already talked about. I think the way we should have withdrawn from Afghanistan, look, I'm not a military expert, but one of the things I would have done, if we haven't done already, is I would have, destroyed the military equipment. If we were going to do that, we should. There's a lot of valuable military equipment that fell in the hands of the Taliban, of which they're parading with and bragging about in propaganda videos. I would have seriously destroyed or sabotaged the more sophisticated of equipment. I would have still kept a military mission in Afghanistan. And if we wanted to halfway help those people, yes, okay, withdraw the regular combat troops, but at least have special forces and at least launch a sustaining bombing campaign with American aircraft. Do what President Nixon did before he abandoned the South Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians in 1973 Paris Peace Accords. One of the few things I like about President Nixon was his Vietnamization strategy pre-1973 was actually growing to be a success. Maybe we could have embarked on that in Afghanistan. I don't know. Special forces, kept the CIA there, kept a big military mission at the U.S. Embassy, or retained the military mission there, and see how it would have gone. But yeah, I do. Do I think we should be engaged in all these nation-building wars? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Without our support, Afghanistan, one way or another, would have fallen to the Taliban. Given the nature of the country's culture and religious majority, is openly clear about that. And moving forward, we have to be real careful about these nation buildings. Let's export democracy, so-called democracy overseas. We have to really go back to the policy of acting in our own strict national interests and really identifying the powers that want to invade and conquer us, which is Russia and China and their allies. And we have to craft national security policy around that.
Very good. Well, I guess we've come to the end of our show.
Any other remaining comments, Jeff?
No, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go.
No, that's all right. Thank you so much, as always, for your generous time and your expertise and your wisdom. And until then, everyone have a great weekend. God bless America. Stay safe and stay healthy. Have a good night.